Hello, and thank you for joining us today. This webinar is hosted by Dayshape in collaboration with Intapp and Johnson Global Accountancy. I have the great pleasure of hosting our panel discussion today, and we'll be introducing you to our panelists and topic of focus. So today we'll be discussing preparing for ISQM 1 and the tools and knowledge to know with 1 year to go. So please note that our webinar will be recorded today. So on today's panel, we have Andrew Bone from Dayshape. From Johnson Global, we have Dane Dowell and Jay Purushottam from Intapp. So a little bit about our panelists then. So Andrew Bone is the CEO and co-founder of Dayshape, an award-winning enterprise software company founded in Edinburgh. So hello from Edinburgh. As a software engineer and Big Four chartered accountant in a previous life, Andrew has first-hand experience of the challenges of resource management in the accounting industry. So Dayshape is an AI-powered resource scheduling platform developed specifically for accountancy firms to optimize engagement planning and resource management. Dayshape supports some of the world's largest accountancy firms, including 2 of the Big Four, and has over 20,000 users globally. So joining us is Dane Dowell, director at Johnson Global. Dane works with PCAOB registered accounting firms to help them identify, develop, and implement opportunities to improve audit quality. With over 15 years of public accounting experience, he spent nearly half his career at the PCAOB, where he conducted inspections of audits and quality control. Prior to this, he worked with asset management clients at PwC in Denver, Singapore, and Washington, DC. Johnson Global is dedicated to helping public accounting firms around the globe to achieve the highest level of audit quality. And finally, joining us from Intapp, Jay Purushottam, Practice Group Leader of Risk Solutions. At Intapp, Jay helps firms modernize their acceptance, continuance, and independent processes using Intapp's suite of risk management solutions. Jay has spent most of his career at the New York Stock Exchange, where he oversaw the exchange's risk and compliance programs. Intapp is trusted by more than 1,600 of the world's top accounting, investment banking, private capital, legal, and consulting firms, and offers end-to-end cloud-based connected firm management software, which is built specifically for the needs of partner-led firms. So over the next 40 minutes, we'll discuss what ISQM 1 means for your firm and within the audit quality landscape. Our panelists will then discuss some of the key ISQM 1 related challenges, the importance of tone at the top, and what tools and tech are out there to help firms prepare. We'll then take some questions from our audience in a live Q&A with our panelists. So please do drop them into the Q&A whenever one springs to mind. So to get us started then, let's look at what ISQM means for firms. And Dane, let's come to you first. Perhaps you can help us set the scene.
Yeah, thanks for that. So ISQM 1, it's basically revising or just revamping the entire quality management structure. It's recently issued standard from the IAASB, but all the different regulators around the world are starting to consider this. And really kind of, we think about 20 years ago was kind of the advent of, well, at least in the US, was the Sarbanes-Oxley, the PCAOB, and kind of audit regulation really took strength and kind of started to force, it wasn't just pure regulation anymore. The focus for the last 20 years has largely been on the engagement performance. And now there's a big push now at the firm level to say, hey, audit firms need to be taking ownership and accountability for audit quality. So it's no longer just the actual individual engagement teams, it's the firm level. So this, I would argue, is kind of the equivalent of Sarbanes-Oxley, the SOX controls for audit firms. They have to go through, and there are different components that are outlined in ISQM 1 where they have to formalize their processes and really kind of say, here's how we're ensuring that we comply with the standard, and then evaluate that on an annual basis. So it is, like I said, it is global. You'll see the IAASB is leading the charge. So December 15, 2022 is when these systems have to be implemented, and they have a year to actually evaluate the compliance with those systems. But similarly, the AICPA in the US has already issued their, or exposed their standard. The PCAOB has issued a concept release a little bit further behind. I know there's just a news article last week around Canada adopting some of these similar standards. So again, this is kind of a global shift to push audit quality, not just at the engagement level, but the firm level. It will be a really big undertaking. This is huge for the industry. And so when I think through kind of the biggest changes, a lot of these things are already in place at a lot of the firms. You'll think through governance, leadership, and all that. it's really the formalization of it and taking accountability for it and making sure that firms own their own quality at the engagement level.
Great, thank you, Dane. So just to frame our discussion then, let's hear a little bit from our panelists on each of their key focus areas. Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Lara. So as Lara mentioned, Dayshape is primarily a platform for engagement, performance management, and resource planning. So as you can see on the left of this slide, this outlines the main components of ISQM1, and unsurprisingly, the resources component, the engagement performance part, that's really the bit that Dayshape, I guess, is closest to, and probably I'll be focusing on in my answers.
Great, thanks. And Dane?
Yeah, so we kind of, I'd say, focus on the overall system of compliance. And so again, as Andrew said, these are all the different components. We often advise firms and help them kind of understand, how do you develop a risk assessment? How do you actually implement controls at the individual level? So ensuring you comply with ethics, ensuring you comply with acceptance. What would those controls look like? And then how do you monitor and ensure they're actually operating and affect it such that you're, adhering to the quality standards?
Great, thank you. And Jay?
Yeah, so when we look at the components of the ISQM1, so this is the visualization of the 8 components. Intapp has long made successful risk management software for accounting firms, and one of our solutions actually does focus on the middle component of acceptance and continuance. And in speaking with our firms, we learned that they look at all 8 components. Eventually, the result is to form a holistic system of quality management. But they've been looking at it smartly, component by component, and saying, okay, what technology or what type of resource can address each component? And when they looked at acceptance and continuance, we were happy to learn that some of our clients and we're fortunate to have several of the top 20 and top 10 firms as our clients for our risk software. They use the risk software they already have for acceptance and continuance to address this particular component. And then also moving over to the left box for relevant ethical requirements. For many of the audience members that are very familiar with the standards, they'll know that that's where independence requirements lie. And in speaking with our firms, they own some of our independent software, and they've figured out a way to, well, let's just use the software we already use for our independence checks, for our conflicts checks, anything having to do with the ethicality of new business, and apply it to this component as well. So, we're happy that they're using our tool, but we're very happy that they were already using a tool and they had something in place. And so meeting these requirements was not a huge lift. Some of the other components certainly are big lifts, but in terms of technology that they have in place, we're happy that they were able to apply what they already learned, which is very much in line with what the IAASB has been advising in their webcasts and speaking sessions as well.
Great, thank you so much, Jay. So let's just say potentially, we've seen a wide range of people who are ready and far along in their planning, and others who have not yet started. So I think this might be a good place to start. So yeah, let's take a question to our panel. So what advice would you give to our attendees and those that are not yet started? Where best to start? Perhaps Dane, you could kick us off with that one.
Thanks. Yeah, like you said, I've seen the range of people who have, some of the big 4 are much farther in this, and some of the mid-tier firms are just starting to deal with it. And some of the smaller firms haven't even touched it, or kind of asking, what is IAASB? What is ISQM1? When I think through kind of the new implementation of a big standard, very similar to Sarbanes-Oxley, there's kind of 2 different things to think about. There's the knowledge gap and the resource gap. And I'd say the first point of starting is really figure out what you know and what you don't know. So, go back to the source of the standard, go through, read ISQM1, figure out, okay, here's everything that they're asking for, the different components. And then take stock of what is your actual system of QC. Do you have a QC manual? Is it formalized? Are you part of a greater alliance or network? Is there a formal manual there? Document some of your processes. So kind of take stock of where you're at, understand the standard, and then do a gap analysis and start to think through really what is the difference between what we currently have in place and what the standard is asking for. If you go to that next slide, we'll kind of show kind of what we do with a lot of the firms is kind of help them with that initial gap analysis, really trying to understand what is it that the standard is asking for and what is it that your current system provides. Again, some of these are going to be very common. You already have ethics and independence requirements in place. That's in the current QC standards. Other things are going to be really new. The two biggest components I think that are different with ISQM 1 is the initial risk assessment. That's something that firms do at an engagement level. You do an audit risk assessment to design your audit. Well, ISQM 1, all these different QC standards are designed to be predicated on risk. So you're going to have to do that initial risk assessment. And then you design controls. Many of those controls are already in place, so it's just formalizing them and really capturing them, the processes you're currently doing, and then implementing anything that is new, perhaps to address some of that. The other big thing that's really different about ISQM 1 is then understanding the monitoring that's required around it. So you put all these policies and processes in place. Now you actually need to monitor, make sure they're actually operating effectively. And if there are deficiencies identified, that kind of, we'll call this 8 o'clock on the wheel, is that root cause and remediation. Trying to understand where the firm is failing, how does this control not capture an independence violation, or if there's an engagement level deficiency that was identified through the PCAOB or through the H3C or some international regulator, how did the firm's system of QC not capture that? So come up with the root cause, and then you have to remediate. So it's really kind of, there's a lot of information in that standard. Start with, figure out what you know, what you don't know, and try and bridge that gap. That'd be my point to start.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to our next question. We've got lots to discuss. So ISQM 1 directs that audit quality firms embed quality into their corporate culture and at the tone at the top. So how important would you say this tone at the top is in meeting the ISQM 1 requirements? And Jay, we'll come to you.
Yeah, so tone at the top is critical. I think most or all of the audience members would agree. And in speaking with our firms, we've spoken with some of our biggest clients and some of our very small accounting firm clients and prospects. And it seems like, especially with the bigger firms, tone at the top is kind of table stakes to even play at that level of complexity. And so they already have, they have good processes in place, they have good systems in place, and they normally do have executive buy-in. What they view these new standards as is a way to now formalize what they already have in place, and maybe even come at it from a new perspective of intentionality and documenting what they've already been doing. So they've already been there, and now they can even beef up to the next level. And one note I wanted to make in terms of firm preparedness. We're 12 months out from when the standards need to be implemented. There are definitely different levels of preparedness when you talk to different firms, and definitely different firm sizes. And when we talk to some of the biggest firms, the top 10 firms, the threshold that they need to meet for these standards is very high, given their geographic locations across the world, given the various service lines and industries that they participate in, and given the general complexity that surrounds their business. That said, given all those things, they already have very robust systems in place. So they're already kind of at a 7 or 8, and now they just need to go to a 10. And then coming back down to the smaller firms, maybe the top 200, top 400, even as small as a sole proprietorship. Some of these standards can seem very intimidating or overwhelming, but what the smaller firms should take solace in is knowing that the IAASB has been very clear that these standards are meant to scale with firm size. So many of the components or parts of the 8 components might not apply to firms that are smaller, or the threshold is much lower than for the bigger firms. Lots of times the smaller firms, they may be a little less mature in their technology journey. They may be a little less mature in their documentation and process journey, but they should take solace in the fact that their threshold that they need to meet is going to be nowhere near as high as, let's say, certainly a top 20 firm. So different levels, it's meant to scale. And the best firms are looking at this as an not as a burden, but as an opportunity to take what they're already doing and make it better. That's really the greatest attitude to have. And speaking with our large firm clients, that's the attitude that's pervasive and that we're behind. And hearing what the IAASB has to say about the standards, we think they would be behind that as well.
Great, thank you, Jay. Anything to add to that, Dane?
Yeah, just from when I was doing my inspections kind of internationally, tone the top is as fluff as it may sound, is really critical. And it is a starting point when we do any of those inspections and when we're kind of evaluating firm systems of QC is what's the messaging? And the messaging is twofold. It's kind of how is it actually being communicated, whether through trainings or emails or kind of the literature that's being produced by the company, but it's also in the actions of management. And so those actions for ISQM 1, it is scalable, but it will require investment in resources. In fact, the standard speaks to resources in 3 different capacities, making sure you have the appropriate human resources, technological resources, and intellectual resources. So I think toward the top is kind of that twofold, how it's being communicated, but how is management actually acting? And are they enabling or investing in appropriate resources to enable their staff to execute quality audits? That's equally important. So I think that can get overlooked sometimes because it is a big investment, but this is a big investment to help hopefully drive future efficiencies and audit quality.
Great, thank you so much. Great, let's move on to our next poll, and yeah, we'll get this one running for you. So we are keen to hear from you what you think is the key challenges around ISQM1 in your firm. It might be that tone at the top, but equally it might be something else. So let us know what you think. And if it is none of the above, then please drop it in the chat as well. We'd love to hear what you think. But yeah, I think that would that'll help guide our discussion as well on where you think the key challenges are. Any thoughts on this just while we're waiting for those polls to come in? Andrew, any thoughts?
Just building a little bit on the last question around tone at the top. I mean, I think the guys covered it really well as far as ISQM1 is concerned. I can speak to my own personal experience. As at Dayshape, we've just been implementing various ISO quality standards and very similar kind of approach in those. And yet, for me, it was really key to kind of sell it to the company as an opportunity to improve things. So, not just see it as red tape. Great,
thank you. Thank you for that. So that's quite interesting. We're seeing lack of capacity is a key issue. And yeah, I guess that's unsurprising. A few of the, let's see any in the chat of none of the above, but we don't have any of those insights. But yeah, so capacity is a key issue. Let's stop sharing that.
I will say the lack of having 0% and the lack of buy-in actually doesn't surprise me. I don't think it will surprise any of the other panelists, because I think firms today understand the importance of that tone at the top and that cultural buy-in. When we see any type of risk transformation process, one of the key components is executive buy-in. So really happy to see that that's not a sticking point, and also not surprised at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's look at that. Interesting, with capacity being that key issue there. So let's look at that from the resources angle. So without a doubt, we know that ISQM1 will require a significant pool in human and technological resources. And if we consider that firms are already understaffed and facing some really very real capacity issues, the obvious question, I think, on a few people's lips are, where are these additional resources going to come from? So let's take that question to our panel. And maybe we'll start with you, Andrew. So like we said earlier, underpinning that success of the system of quality management is the resources requirement. So how can, how can technology help in this area?
Well, we kind of seeing it a lot, hearing it a lot in the press. It's almost becoming a cliche, this sort of war for talent headline within accountancy sector and within generally in the world right now. So I think if firms are already struggling to fill vacancies they've got, then obviously just trying to hire more people and throw more bodies at ISQM1 isn't necessarily going to be a viable option for everyone. And I guess that then leaves you with the current team that you've got. So if this is an additional overhead or workload for that team, not many firms are going to want to scale back their fee earning work And so that then leaves effectively technology as a solution. And I think technology can help in a few different ways. Firstly, it can be directly applicable to ISQM1. So you can implement, for example, automated controls within technology that help to provide that assurance that you're doing things in the right way. So you're then not requiring so much manual overhead to check things. Technology can also be really useful in defining new processes and workflows and enforcing those, so that if you are creating new processes that are more compliant, you then have that assurance that those are being followed. And thirdly, I guess technology can create efficiencies in other parts of the firm, freeing up people from administrative tasks and therefore sort of indirectly helping with ISQM1 by freeing up resources elsewhere.
Great, thank you. So then I guess focusing in on technology and tools that can help. So the ISQM1 guidance states that as part of the system of quality management, appropriate technological resources are attained or developed, implemented, maintained, and used to enable the operation of a firm's system of quality management and ensure the performance of engagement. So with this in mind, how can the right tools and technology help to build and maintain the system of quality management? And we'll come first to you, Jay. I think a good place to start is at the right of the start of the life cycle engagement. So how can acceptance and continuance, feed into this, and how can technology help there?
Yeah, so in a firm's risk management process, acceptance and continuance is always a core part of that risk management process. I talked a little bit previously about how our technology helps there, but when we think of acceptance and continuance, it's important for the firm to have a really good 360 understanding of a new entity that they are thinking of bringing on board for new business. And then once they have that entity as an existing client, when they're evaluating a new engagement for that client, understanding their full capacity as a firm to be able to perform that engagement. Is that client a client that the firm can take on from a conflicts and an independence perspective? Is it a client that the firm wants to and should take on from a risk profile perspective? Every firm has kind of their own defined risk profile. These are the types of clients we work with. These are the geos. These are the industries. These are the service lines. Do the incoming clients match that profile that the firm has defined for itself? So there is certainly software should be used there, because it's very difficult to do a full research process on a new entity just by manual searches. And this is also where a firm's attitude and philosophy around risk management really comes into play. As firms will know, risk management by itself does not necessarily drive revenue. It certainly doesn't earn revenue for the firm. That's the actual service lines that will earn the revenue for the firm. However, we're seeing an excellent shift in mentality in firms where they say, yes, that's true. Risk assessment and, for example, the response to these standards, that won't directly lead to new revenue. But what it does for firms is it enables them to form kind of the stable core of a risk management process, and they can use that then to grow faster. They can grow in different ways, different geos, different service lines, and they can be confident that they have the risk management process in place so that they don't always need to be adding resources to that risk process as the firm grows. They can just scale with what they already have. They have technology that kind of meets where they are today and then grows with them. Lots of firms actually come to us for risk management software, not because their risk management process is broken. Sure, it can do some improvements, but it is working today. But they have ambitions to maybe double in size or grow 50% in the next 3 to 5 years. And they know that the risk assessment process they have in place today won't be able to handle that kind of growth. So we really like to see that kind of philosophy where risk management enables that kind of revenue and that kind of growth. So acceptance and continuance processes are a core part of that, risk management process.
Great, thank you. And anything on the relevant ethical requirements there as well that we can touch on?
Yes, thanks for asking about that, Lara. So and talking with our firms on how they're specifically using either their own resources, their own knowledge, or their own technology or technology that they already own to respond to the acceptance and continuance and the ethical requirement components. We were happy to learn that several of the top 20, top 10 firms that today own our risk management software decided, well, we already use technology. In this case, happy to say we use Intapp technology to run our independence process, to run our conflicts process. Well, those are key parts of the ethical requirements component of ISQM 1. So several of the large firms have now used that software to meet that requirement in ISQM 1. And they've told us, they've said, if we didn't have a tool in place, if we didn't have your tool in place or any tool, that would have been a much bigger lift than it is today. But the fact that they have something in place, they can repurpose it, or in some ways, not even repurpose it, just use it the way they're already using it. And now they can just document that they have a tool in place that covers those requirements. So we were really happy to hear that. And that meshes very well with the messaging from the IAASB, where they've said, you do not need to start from scratch to meet these requirements. That's not what we mean. We mean use what you have today, do that gap analysis that Dane was referring to at the beginning of the webinar, find out where you do need to level up, but leverage what you have today and then meet that gap either by extending the use of what you already have or putting resources to add more, technology, people, or intelligence.
Great, thank you so much. So then moving on to looking at the engagement performance component. So once that engagement has been accepted, so we're looking at the acceptance and continuance, how can technology support and enhance engagement performance to meet those requirements? And I think that would be a good one to come to you for, Andrew. Any thoughts on that one?
So I thought I'd start with a little quote from the standard itself, in case anyone hasn't committed it to memory yet. So the relevant quote here was, engagement team members are assigned to each engagement, including engagement partner, who have appropriate competence and capabilities, including being given sufficient time to consistently perform quality engagements. That really talks to, I suppose, the core of what we try and do at Dayshape is really about trying to have the right people with the right skills involved in the engagement, touching on both the resources component, but ultimately, if you don't have that, then you're not going to get the performance and the quality of the engagement that you want. So when you're doing this at scale in particular, having some sort of software that helps you track people's skills and capabilities and competencies as it refers to in the standard, it can be really helpful to not only ensure that you are doing a good job of making good assignments of the appropriate people onto the appropriate work, but also allowing you to evidence that you have done that and that you've got a sort of robust process that you're using to make those assessments and to ensure that you're doing that in a standardized and consistent way firm-wide. So certainly software can be a big help there, particularly if you're trying to do it across a large number of engagements or a large number of staff.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Any thoughts there, Dane, on any of the points raised?
No, I think they're all spot on. And to Jay's point, we're not starting from scratch necessarily. Sometimes you have current processes in place and you already have technology you're using. So great, continue using that. But to the extent you have to start to think about scalability of this, and as you're growing, or depending again how complex your network is, you might need additional resources or tools. And so it's just thinking through, again, what is the standard asking and how do we actually comply with that? And then formalizing that. Where I think the strain at a firm level, so kind of at the individual process level, the actual engagement level, we've talked about independence and ethics, acceptance and continuance, and the actual execution of the engagement. The firm, taking a step back, will need to think through, okay, how do our resources enable us to actually do the risk assessment, monitor the controls that are in place, making sure they are effective. And so when I talk about controls at a firm level, it's going back to saying, okay, we have these independence requirements, we have acceptance and continuance requirements, we have engagement performance, we have to execute quality audits. How do we double check that independence processes were followed? How do we double check that acceptance and continuance processes were followed? How do we ensure that our engagements are quality? And those are the controls you're going to need to start formalize and think through from a software standpoint of how do we track all of these things and ensure and kind of really monitor that? What are the key metrics you're pulling in? A lot of that, I think we'll start to see technology will enable more efficient use of time. And so that will help free up some of the resources to enable at the firm level, kind of building more capacity in. But it is going to be an investment, I think, at the initial upfront implementation that will hopefully drive future efficiencies.
Great. Thank you so much. So then we do have some questions coming in on the Q&A, so that's great to see. Keep them coming in, and we will get to those just after this. So yeah, please, if you've got any questions, just a reminder to drop them in, and we'll answer as many as we can. So Jen, just looking at what we discussed so far, and you know, the solutions that are out there, the help and support. Let's look at, you know, our recommended next steps then. So with the things that we've discussed and, you know, the insights that we shared, yeah, what next steps do we have to recommend to those attending? And Jay, shall we come to you for this one first?
Sure. So I think the important thing that we would want the audience to take away is knowing that there are tools and there are services available to help you. So Dayshape is an excellent technology software company that helps with resource. Intapp obviously helps in a lot of areas around risk management and document management. Dane at JGA is very good at the advisory level and evaluation and assessment level. It's interesting, a lot of times when we talk to accounting firms for the first time, or they come to us as a prospect, they didn't even realize that the services that we provide around independence, around acceptance and continuance, and a few other risk management and non-risk management areas even existed. They didn't realize that there was a technology provider that provided those services. And that it makes me think that there are many firms out there, maybe some of the mid and smaller firms, that don't know or aren't aware that there are technology tools out there that can help them, if not with all of the components with ISQM1, with several. And that will free up their time to really attack some of the really, really big heavy lift components that are going to be very, you know, that will be big hurdles. You know, these are not easy standards to abide by. This is not an easy system to implement by any means. That's why the IAASB gave so much runway. They do understand the intricacy and the depth that the firms will have to kind of self-examine, self-assess, and then create these new systems, and then create a monitoring and reporting mechanism that covers these new systems. It's a lot of steps. So we want the audience to take away that there are tools, there are services that can help. And so that's probably one of our biggest takeaway. I do see, Larry mentioned, I do see some questions in the chat, so maybe we'll talk about those in depth once we cover this topic.
Yeah, great, thank you. Any recommendations from you, Dane, on next steps? And yeah, I guess the monitoring and remediation step in there as well is really key. I mean, that'll be the next thing, you know, having things in place, but then also being able to exemplify that that the system of quality management is actually working and delivering. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the first part I kind of talked about is that initial risk assessment, gap analysis, implement it. Once you get it implemented, it's starting to figure out how do you monitor, and the root cause remediation around some of that. I think that will be a big challenge for firms. Kind of similar to Jay, my general thought is don't go it alone. There's a lot of resources out there. So you can go to the IAASB and have webinars and publications. All the different regulators are putting out publications that kind of help provide different thoughts and how do you scale this? What really does that mean? But then there are different networks out there. So reach out to your own alliance through your own network internally, externally. There are consultants. I mean, there's lots of different possibilities of how you can get the knowledge you need to implement this, and then the resources you need to actually execute, whether that be the human, intellectual, or technological aspects.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll mention one more thing, and this might tie into Graham Durgan's question. In terms of expertise, Of course, accounting firms are competitors in the business landscape, depending on which tier each firm operates in. But from a regulatory perspective, we're learning, and we're not surprised to learn, that firms are very open in information sharing and collaborating on methods to respond to these standards and other regulatory standards. In general, firms have the attitude that what's good for the industry from a regular perspective is good for each individual firm, and vice versa. Anytime a specific firm gets hit with an independence violation or any kind of negative news from one of the large regulators, that's generally not good for the industry overall. So anything that can help each firm stay on the right side of regulation is good for the industry. So, the big firms, of course, talk with each other. That's just kind of a matter of fact. But for the smaller firms that might need to outsource or source externally areas of expertise, and Graham mentioned specific audit standards and financial reporting standards. The big firms, they'll have the executive buy-in. They'll have their chief auditor running this process. That chief auditor, she or he will have a good understanding of those standards already. Smaller firms might not have that luxury. They might not have that resource. So they'll need to go to the market to find out, well, where can we learn these standards to a T, to the point where we can test it. So that will take some funding, that likely will take some resources, but also know that you don't necessarily need to solve all problems by December 2022. The IAASB has been pretty clear on solving today's problem, and then you can grow the system as your firm grows and as you get used to the system that you've adopted. So that's what I would say. It will take funding, it will take resourcing, and that's going to be kind of table stakes for accommodating to these standards, but it's definitely a worthwhile step. So Graham, hopefully that answered your question fully. Definitely let us know if not.
I think, just to pick up on Graham's question, I think he might have asked it, apologies if I'm wrong, but when I was referring to things like tracking the most appropriate people to work on engagements, and I think, of course, I would agree that obviously the consistent core knowledge is key, and by testing it, certainly a lot of people who are working in practices are going through their CPA or equivalent exams on those sorts of things. But what I was referring to just be a bit clearer, was perhaps industry specialisms. For example, when I actually worked in audit myself, I did a wide range of customers, and doing an audit of a fund was very different to doing an audit of a paper factory. So, you being able to track those kinds of things in a bit more detail was really what I was referring to. So you can have better alignment of knowledge and skills.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts on next steps from you, Andrew, before we move on to our Q&A? We've got.
I think the guys have pretty much covered it. Given the time, we should move on.
Great, let's move on. Okay, so our Q&A, if we're okay with it, we've answered that question there. So we've got a really good one here coming in about scalability. And I quite like your thoughts on this one, Dane. So the question is, so what does ISQM mean for smaller firms and its scalability? And I know that we spoke about this a little bit already, but I just to answer that one, if there's anything to add.
Yeah, it's hard to give a black and white answer here. It's going to be a case-by-case basis. And I think that's what all the regulators are trying to say is we can't, it's principles-based. Here's what we want you to make sure that you're covering. Here's the components. But again, it starts with your risk assessment. So to Jay's point, I think if you're not a global firm, you're only operating within your country, then great. Your risk profile is much less. If you have only one public client and the rest are private, your risk profile is much different. So it's understanding your risks, and then thinking through how do we address those risks. When I think of scalability, I do think of it from two different components, though. I think there's an aspect of bringing the standard down to the size of your firm, but bringing or creating a structure that is also scalable as your firm changes. And so there's kind of the initial implementation of how do I adapt or adopt this today for who we are, how we're structured today, but how do we also create a system that enables us to grow, and that the system of QC will continue to modify and adapt with that. And that's where I think through, leveraging technology is really important to enable kind of efficiency and economies of scale as you grow. It's really easy if you have 5 clients to maybe keep an Excel spreadsheet and you can do all of your QC controls in Excel. Great, that might be simple, but when you grow to 20 or 100 clients, all of a sudden tracking all the different requirements becomes much more difficult in Excel, right? So when you think through kind of as you implement those controls, what makes sense for your company based on where you are today, but also as you grow, what will enable that growth? But that's also, again, there's no one answer that fits everyone. So if you're not sure what that looks like, or if you think, hey, this just feels like it's too much for us, talk to people, talk to other firms your size, talk to or look at the resources that are published from the IAASB, reach out to consultants and try to understand really what is the risk here and how can I address that? That's what the standard is driving is. What's the risk? How does your structure enable and ensure quality relative to that component?
Great, thank you. That's great. So there's a question here around technology and challenges. So I think that one might be quite a good one for you, Andrew. So what kind of challenges are you seeing with the use of technology and or ISQM1 tools? So I guess that's maybe around, yeah, implementing that technology, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I think in common with any technology implementation, one of the biggest challenges is always the adoption and the change management side of it. And sometimes we see firms maybe just underestimate that a little bit, and the need for really, I suppose, winning the hearts and minds of the team and selling why this is going to be a positive change for them, why they should use new tools, because people are sometimes just uncomfortable with change, regardless what the change is. So I certainly think that would be one thing, not to underestimate the importance of that. And the second would also just be about the timescales of these things. Although the actual date is about a year away, it can take a while to roll out new systems. In particular, it can take nearly as long to get off old systems and try and transition across. So yeah, I would be conscious of that sort of time scale as well, and not think, oh, it's a year away. Actually, some of these things maybe take a bit longer than people sometimes expect.
Great, thank you. Anyone have anything else to add on that one?
Yeah, I was going to add real quick 2 thoughts. When you talk about change management, as an auditor, my mind goes to ITGCs. And again, from a SOX standpoint, we think of audits and like you have to have your IT systems safe, secured, locked down. You have to have effective change management, logical security. That same standard will go into effect from a firm level. So all these different systems that we are thinking about and implementing, the implementation is really important, and then making sure those systems are secure. It goes back to kind of information and communication, which is a different component, but you have to have accurate and complete information. And the way to do that is to ensure you have proper controls around how something was implemented and then who has access to that. So really making sure that these systems are protected, I guess, and secured. The other thing that I was just thinking through is more just as everything becomes more automated, I see this in the audit industry, just in terms of issuers, is the integration of information and technology. So trying to figure out, as you are planning and saying, great, we're using this software here, we're using this software here, how can you integrate and how do the software speak to each other? So can your resource management system, does that speak to hey, how many, if you're looking at resource allocation and things like that, what kind of data points can you pull from that can you use and leverage in maybe different scorecards, KPIs that you're using at a firm level? It's just that communication of information across different systems.
Great, thank you so much. Wow, so much to discuss there. Thank you all for your insights and for sharing it, and special thanks to Intapp and Johnson Global Accountancy for joining us and for such a great panel discussion. Just very quickly, so for more information, we have our websites there. So, we do encourage you to reach out to us with any questions. And also a final recommendation for us, if you haven't yet watched the IAASB's Quality Management webinar series, we highly recommend doing that. It's been really useful for us, and that gives a real close, in detail look at ISQM1 and its requirements. So yeah, thank you all for joining us today. I hope we find this useful, and we've just touched on a couple of the tools and help and support out there today. So yeah, we'll leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.